But Amy Klobuchar, who got so much acclaim from last night, she is also yet to really receive any significant scrutiny. There was stories that came out when she first entered the race. In fact, just before she did, if I'm not mistaken, it was former staffers who were basically trying to convince her not to run because they were aware of major liabilities that she had in terms of the way that she treated former staff. Some of those stories came out then. I don't know if all of them have come out. I've heard that that is not the case, that there are more, but who knows? Maybe that's just rumors. But that happened for a couple of days when she came out. Then it quieted down, I think in large part because she was not doing very well. And people felt like, what's the point of bringing these things up and having to own these things when it's not going to matter anyways? Well, now it's starting to matter. And so we're going to start to hear a little bit more. In fact, the first place that we heard it, sort of surprising, is was this today or yesterday? Can we check? Because she's still up in New Hampshire, so I suspect that maybe it was yesterday during the actual voting. And here is Sunny Hostin. Is that how I pronounce her name? From The View.
And it was yesterday.
Okay, this is yesterday. This is the day of the voting. Sunny Hostin, who is of The View, she apparently is a former prosecutor. I did not know that. And she has a surprise. I gotta think that Amy Klobuchar went on The View and did not anticipate this type of questioning.
Well, a Washington Post poll from last month had you with less than 0.5% of African American support. That's lower than even Mayor Pete Buttigieg. He has 2%. And I've said this often on the show, you need African American support to become the Democratic nominee. Now, your tough on crime approach when you were a county attorney in Minnesota is criticized for disproportionately harming black and brown people. And when I look at that record, you failed to prosecute a single killing by the police during the 8 years you headed prosecutions. And there were more than 24 police-involved killings in that period. That's just one example. How do you defend that record?
Okay, well, let's start. I'll lead out to the support, but I want to start with my work as county attorney. We all know there's systematic racism in this criminal justice system. There's no doubt about that. And I worked really hard when I was there.
You know what's fascinating about that response? It's exactly what Pete Buttigieg said when he was questioned. There's systematic racism. I'm going to acknowledge that. Therefore, I am, in many respects, offloading some of the responsibility for my participation, not just participating in the system, but running the system.
Executing it.
Well, this is part of the Adolf Reed critique of essentializing, which is if I learn certain speech and discursive acts, I can actually just say, like, I acknowledge and
have no
really, what
responsibility.
can you do about it? Because it's an immovable thing.
She is saying, don't hate the player, hate the game. And, but the game would fall apart if the key player like you are doesn't play.
Really hard when I was there, and I'm proud of the work we did to go after white-collar criminals, to use drug court in a big way. We had a very successful drug court, and we actually got a 12% decrease in incarceration rates for African Americans. And I also diversified the office, which I think is really, really important. But there is so much more work that we have to do. And that's why when I got to the U.S. Senate, I started working on things like the First Step Act, which we passed, which has decreased the criminal penalties and allowed some nonviolent offenders to get out of prison. I think we have to do that in a bigger way as well. And then as for my support in the African American community.
We'll skip this and just go a little bit ahead here to where Sunny Hostin follows up.
When they turn 18, I think that is going to matter. I'm the leader on the bill to get rid of gerrymandering, to get rid of voting purges. As my friend Stacey Abrams, who go ahead.
Senator,
I have a black friend. Go ahead.
As my friend Stacey Abrams, who Go ahead.
Senator, I think that your record as a prosecutor matters as well. And when you campaigned for the Senate, you cited your prosecution of 16-year-old black teenager Mayan Burrell as an example of having been an aggressive prosecutor. And it gives me no pleasure to say this because, as you know, I was a prosecutor as well. I've reviewed the facts of that case, and it is one of the most flawed investigations and prosecutions that I think I have ever seen.
Pause it for 1 second. Now, listen, folks, I'm not a mind reader, but I am sometimes better. And I would wager that what is happening right now in Amy Klobuchar's mind is when I get a hold of the staffer who set me up in this interview and did not know that I was going to be asked these questions, there is going to be hell to pay.
There's a stapler with someone's name on it.
When you look at it, you have your homicide detective on tape offering informants $500 a piece for names. When I looked at it, I also saw that Mr. Burrell's alibi witnesses were not looked at. His surveillance tapes were not looked at. I mean, how do you defend something like that to someone like me who is the mother of a black boy, a black teenager? This case would be my worst nightmare.
Well, Sonny, I'll start with this. I've been very clear. All of the evidence needs to be immediately reviewed in that case. The past evidence and also any new evidence that has come forward, I've called for that. And I think you and I both share that background. And I have always believed that a job of a prosecutor is to protect the innocent and convict the guilty. But protect the innocent has to be key. So this case involved an 11-year-old African-American girl who was shot doing her homework at her kitchen table. I got to know her family, and I worked with them. But I would say I think any prosecutor who cares about justice, and I've always been on the side of justice, would say all evidence must be reviewed immediately, and that's what I think has to happen here.
Well, you're a U.S. Senator.
You for bringing it up.
You're a U.S. Senator now. You're a powerful woman. What do you intend to do to right this wrong?
Well, I've called for the office and the courts to review the evidence. That is what we must do in the justice system. I've also worked extensively with the Innocence Project in my previous job, and we reviewed all the serious cases we had that involved DNA evidence. This one didn't, but we reviewed those cases.
It had no gun, it had no DNA evidence, and it had no fingerprints.
Are we prosecuting Amy Klobuchar
today? So this is
today?
A case that must be reviewed. Sonny, I think you know that I care so much about justice, and this case must be reviewed.
Yeah, there's Joy Behar saying, are we prosecuting Amy Klobuchar?
Yeah, that very bad look for Joy.
Yes,
I actually I love the idea of Amy Klobuchar, like in like De Niro kind of movie, like with the stapler, just being like, some people say I do it because it's fun. Other people, maybe because maybe you haven't heard this before. Maybe you heard too much. My dad was a drunk. She starts telling the same story. She repeats all the time. I put a black kid in jail for life without any evidence. You know why? I thought it might swing 2 points in a suburban district. You don't think I won't force you to shave my legs?
When you pivot from the question of the innocence of one person regarding a crime to how the crime impacted the victim, you know that you have a bit of a problem. I mean, and,
Sonny got
and I don't know what happened with I think that was that the conviction that was thrown out, and then subsequently he was found guilty by another jury. It's unclear to me. I haven't dug into it. I have no reason not to believe Hostin there, who was a former prosecutor, but there definitely seems to be questions there, and we'll see.
I just want to say too, this is something that maybe is more minor, but this is a piece that came out a couple days ago in The Intercept. Amy Klobuchar, as a prosecutor, prosecuted possession of khat, which is an herbal stimulant grown in Northeast Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. It's used widely in social gatherings as the equivalent to drinking coffee or tea. So basically, like, she targeted primarily the Somali community for using something that's like analogous to chewing tobacco. And I'm sorry, I just don't see how. I think there's some very clear political calculations behind who she's prosecuting and why, and she better start answering and talking about them.
And it's not like her hands were tied. Prosecutors have a ton of discretion.
Lastly, Nina,
we have a new drop for Amy as well.
What's that?